The world grows quiet, and the story begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Sounds of Stories. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the Sounds of Stories. Tonight's tale is the Cop and the Anthem, revised, written by O. Henry. Now, O. Henry was famous for twist endings, but this story may contain one of the most ironic and heartfelt turns of all. The story's about Soapy, a homeless man in New York who isn't trying to stay out of jail, he's trying desperately to get into it before winter arrives. What follows is a series of comedic failures, misunderstandings, and one unforgettable night beneath the falling snow. Now, before we begin tonight's story, I have a quick question for all of you amazing listeners out there. How'd you find this video? Did the awesome thumbnail pull you in? Did you arrive here from the short video I made earlier? Or did you stumble across the Cop and the Anthem while wandering the shelves of YouTube? Please let me know down below. I really am curious to how these stories are finding you. But without further ado, let's let the pages turn. The revised version of The Cop and the Anthem, written by O. Henry. Winter was coming to New York. The first signs were already there. The nights were colder, the wind cut through the streets. The benches in Madison Square no longer felt like places to rest, but warnings of what was ahead. Soapy knew what winter meant. For the first few years, his solution had been simple. 3 months on Blackwell's Island, a warm bed, regular meals, a roof overhead. To Soapy, jail wasn't punishment, it was a winter plan. Now, he had no interest in shelters or charity. He preferred to solve the problem his own way. And tonight, he intended to earn himself a place behind bars. Soapy rose from the bench and made his way toward Broadway. One of the finest restaurants in the city stood there, glowing warmly against the cold night. Throughout its windows, he could see white tablecloths, polished silver, and people enjoying expensive dinners. His plan was simple. He'd walk in, enjoy a grand meal, and when the bill arrived, calmly admit he had no money. The police would be called, the judge would do the rest, and Blackwell's Island would welcome him for the winter. Soapy examined himself. His coat was worn, but presentable enough from the chest upward. His face was clean. His tie was neat. It was an old gift from a missionary lady on Thanksgiving. If he could make it to a table before anyone noticed the rest of him, the plan might succeed. He stepped confidently toward the entrance. The head waiter looked him over. His eyes traveled downward, past the tie, past the coat, to the worn trousers and tired shoes. The next moment came quickly. Hands appeared. Soapy found himself lifted, turned around, and sent back into the cold night air. The restaurant doors closed behind him. He brushed himself off. Well, he seemed to think, that didn't go according to plan. Blackwell's Island would have to wait. After roughly getting tossed out of the restaurant, Soapy stepped away and continued down the street. Soon he passed a brightly lit store window, glowing beneath the city lights. An idea came to him. This one was certain to work. He picked up a loose stone from the street and, without hesitation, crash! Glass shattered across the sidewalk. People turned, and a police officer came running. Soapy remained exactly where he was, hands in pockets, calm, waiting. The officer stopped. "Who did that?" he demanded. Soapy gave no answer. Instead, he smiled slightly and stood beside the broken window as if he had nowhere else to be. The officer looked at him. Then he looked down the street. A young man was hurrying away in the distance. "There goes your man!" someone shouted. The officer took off after him at once. Soapy stared. The guilty man had stayed. The innocent man had run. And somehow, the innocent man was being chased. For a moment, Soapy simply stood there in the cold. Then he sighed and continued on his way. Blackwell's Island remained out of reach. After 2 failed attempts, Soapy was forced to move on. A few blocks later, he found himself beneath the bright lights of Broadway again. Music drifted from nearby theaters. People laughed as they moved along the sidewalks. Carriages and cabs rolled through the streets. Near the corner stood a police officer. Soapy saw his chance. He began to shout. He laughed loudly. He staggered across the sidewalk. He moved his arms and spoke nonsense to no one at all. If this didn't bring an arrest, nothing would. The officer watched him for a moment. Soapy waited. The officer shrugged. Nah, he said to another man nearby. College boys celebrating. Harmless enough. Then he turned away. Soapy froze. He had shouted, he had staggered, he had made a complete fool of himself. And still, nothing. The law had looked him directly in the face and again walked away. Soapy adjusted his coat and continued down the street. Blackwell's Island seemed further away than ever. Soapy then sadly continued down the street, growing colder and more frustrated with every failed attempt. Then he saw it. An umbrella. It rested between the entrance of a cigar store. Its owner stood nearby, slowly lighting a cigar and paying little attention to anything else. Soapy stopped. Another plan formed. He walked calmly to the umbrella. He picked it up and turned to leave. "Hey," the man called. "That's my umbrella." Soapy turned back and looked at him. "Oh, is it?" he asked calmly. "If it is yours, then why not go call a policeman?" The man hesitated. His confidence disappeared. "Well," he said slowly, "maybe it isn't mine." Soapy blinked. The man shifted awkwardly. "I found it myself this morning," he admitted. "Someone probably left it somewhere." The two men stood in silence. The policeman nearby never moved. At least the man stepped forward. Just go ahead and keep it," he said. Soapy handed it back at once. No, thank you." Then he turned and walked away. Once again, Blackwell's Island had escaped him. So, once again, Soapy walked on. His plans were disappearing one by one. Then he noticed a woman standing near a shop window. A police officer stood only a short distance away. Soapy stopped. At last, a perfect opportunity. He straightened himself and stepped toward her. He smiled, tipped his hat, and spoke with all the confidence he could gather. "Good evening," he said. The woman turned. Soapy waited for outrage. He expected her to call for help. He expected the policeman to come running. Instead, the woman smiled. "Why, hello," she said pleasantly. Soapy blinked. She moved closer and slipped her arm through his. "I was hoping you'd speak to me," she said. Soapy stood frozen. The policeman glanced over and then looked away. The woman smiled again. "Come along," she said. Soapy carefully removed her arm from his. With great dignity, he walked away. And Blackwell's Island remained as distant as ever. And that's when the night had grown quiet. Snow drifted slowly through the streets as Soapy walked without direction. Then he stopped. Before him stood an old church. Lights spilled gently from its window, and from inside came music. And a hymn drifted out into the cold night air. Soapy stood still. The sound carried him backward through the years. He remembered warmer days, better days, days filled with hope. He thought of friends, of work, of ambition, of the man he once believed he would become. And for the first time that night, Blackwell's Island disappeared from his thoughts. And a different idea took its place. Tomorrow would be a new day. He would find work, he would rebuild his life, he would become the man he used to be. Snow settled quietly around him. Then a voice broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" Soapy turned. A police officer stood behind him. "Nothing," Soapy answered. The officer looked at him. "Come with me." The next morning, the judge handed down the sentence: 3 months on Blackwell's Island. And there you have it, everyone. A bittersweet story about hope arriving at the very moment life seems ready to change course. After a night spent chasing arrest after arrest, Soapy finally looks towards something greater, only for fate to deliver one final twist. And thanks for spending your time here with us at the Sounds of Stories. Come back for another adventure. And remember, when the world seems to fade, the stories always remain.